The Case of the Japanese Envoy, The New Adventures of Sherlock Holmes, by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle and Nora Godwin, narrated by Bryan Godwin. When we returned from our 4-day trip to Scotland in early September 1883, I really could have used a little breather. The moodiness that Holmes had noticed before we started our trip to Scotland turned out to be a permanent struggle between anxiety and high spirits, which often manifested in me being very tired and irritated, which I tried to mask with cheerfulness. Ever since the life-threatening incident at Highgate Cemetery a few months ago, I have not been able to find much sleep because I have not processed them yet. This was also confirmed by the fact that I had not been able to put anything about this case onto paper. I planned on forcing myself to write them down in the coming days, because it would certainly ease my ability to emotionally accept the experience to soberly recapitulate the facts. But life, being a reliable random mess, had already helped us to our next case. I was not even close to getting done with unpacking our suitcases as our new case arrived at our doorstep. Holmes, who was not involved in such mundane matters, had just picked up his Stradivari when our housekeeper, Miss Hudson, knocked at the door. "Yes, please?" he shouted and put the violin without playing it back in its case. Miss Hudson entered, bringing with her an unknown guest of East Asian origin, but dressed in European clothes. "Mr. Holmes," she said, "excuse the interruption, but this is Mr. Shimada from the Japanese Consulate in London. He wishes to make an urgent request." Holmes immediately sensed the approaching exotic challenge, while I firmly decided not to accompany him to the Far East. He thanked Miss Hudson and said goodbye so we could talk undisturbed with our guest. After our housekeeper closed the door from outside, Mr. Shimada came up to us and bowed. "Hello, gentlemen," he said in almost accent-free English. "Konnichiwa," Holmes replied. I was so astonished by Holmes's Japanese skills so that my bowing did not look quite as flawless as I would have wanted it to. "What brings you to us, Mr. Shimada?" "Unfortunately, there has been a regrettable incident that has befallen our head of delegation, His Majesty's Envoy of the Tenno," Mr. Shimada replied. "Actually, it is an equally disturbing and delicate situation. I was told you were the right man to handle the matter with the necessary tact and discretion." Holmes nodded. "Certainly," he assured. "Has the consul gotten into trouble?" Mr. Shimada took a deep breath. "Mr. Holmes, you should know that the Japanese emperor is currently pursuing a policy of enlightenment and is trying to open the empire more towards the rest of the world. The government has therefore set up a provisional diplomatic mission in the main European capitals like Paris, Vienna, Berlin, and London, whose permanent status is yet to be decided. A bilateral upset, even a scandal, could give this vineyard a major setback." "I understand," said Holmes, who, truthfully speaking, had little interest in politics and diplomacy. "What kind of potential upset are we talking about?" Shimada hesitated. "The consul is dead. He was murdered." Looking at Holmes's face, I could tell that he was thrilled, so I bowed again and said, "Our sincere condolences, Mr. Shimada." Holmes, a little surprised about my preemptive bow, promptly switched into his investigative mode. "How, where, and when did this happen?" "This morning," Mr. Shimada replied. "Right after it happened, I came here. Before the consul died, he complained about shortness of breath, nausea, and numbness of the whole body, which had started and intensified overnight. Very soon after that, he could no longer breathe and suffocated. There was nothing we could have done for him." "Did you call the police?" I interjected. Mr. Shimada denied. "The premises of the Japanese legation, including its residential quarters, are not accessible to everyone, and are to a certain extent extraterritorial areas. Because of that, this area is not under the jurisdiction of the British authorities unless we allow it. So far, we have agreed on treating the matter internally to avoid any political resentment, and above all, not to bring this to the attention of the public. That is why we hope you can clear up this case for us." "Definitely," said Holmes. "However, I still have some questions for you. First of all, if the consulate is, as you say, a closed-up area, then the circle of suspects reduces itself to the personnel, right?" "Unfortunately, this is correct," Mr. Shimada replied, "and also another reason why I have not accepted the involvement of the British police so far." Seemingly, Holmes's interest in the case increased further. And how many people work at the consulate? He asked. 5, said Mr. Shimada, but he immediately corrected himself. Well, 4, since the consul's demise. The economic attaché, the military attaché, the cook, and myself. Manageable, Holmes muttered, more to himself. What is your function, Mr. Shimada? For a second, Mr. Shimada hesitated and lowered his head. My official title is that of a cultural attaché. However, this accreditation is a camouflage. As a matter of fact, I am the secret security officer who is assigned for every legation by the Japanese homeland. My job is to protect our staff, especially the consul. Mr. Shimada's regret about his own personal failure was etched in his face. It should not be easy to find the right words for a situation like this. Holmes should prove this with his next statement. That is unfortunate, he said. You probably did not execute this task to the complete satisfaction of all the concerned. A shameful inadequacy on my part, Mr. Shimada confirmed, without letting on a possible offense by Holmes. Inexcusable. My only hope is the mercy of my superiors that I am trying to increase through solving this case. Of course, with your valued help, Mr. Holmes. Do you have any criminal knowledge yourself? Asked Holmes. Not at your level, Mr. Shimada responded with demonstrative modesty. However, after serving the Imperial Guard, I served as a police investigator in Tokyo for 2 years. Before Holmes could again make a thoughtless derogatory remark, I stated, that will certainly make our future cooperation easier. But Mr. Shimada, I continued, as a doctor, I do have a question. How can you be so sure that it is murder? Could it not have been a natural cause of death? Of course, you will have the opportunity to review my verdict, Mr. Shimada replied, though you need to know that this kind of poisoning is a common occurrence in Japan. I recognize it when I see it. I involuntarily wrinkled my brow. The poisoning? Shimada shook his head. Well, to be precise, the death by fugu. Fugu? Holmes, suddenly alerted, repeated. The Pacific pufferfish, Mr. Shimada explained. Its innards and some subspecies, the skin is highly toxic. It requires special knowledge and skills in filleting and preparation. That is why the consumption is actually prohibited in Japan. Nevertheless, hundreds of people die each year from fugu poisoning, mostly due to lack of caution or expertise, but sometimes it might indeed be murder. In our case, there is no doubt that the relevant-like fish smelling poison was willingly extracted from the fish's gallbladder, the deadly application in mind. But the poison only unfolds its lethal effect after hours, said Holmes. This means that the actual time of crime was last night. Did the consul leave the premises of the Japanese embassy yesterday? Mr. Shimada declined. Even I understood that now, not only the crime scene, but the time of crime was certain. And our suspects could only be the 4 that were also present in the building, including our client. After clarifying the financial terms and bidding Mr. Shimada adieu, we agreed to follow him to the consulate in an hour. Fittingly, the premises of the Imperial Legation were located in Westminster, on the Piccadilly. During the carriage ride, Holmes pondered about the fugu. An interesting creature, this pufferfish, he said. By all means, he defends himself against being eaten. He has spines and can inflate to deter, and even in death, he pulls his predator with him into the abyss. I'll probably dedicate a few pages of my manuscript to this fish. I looked at Holmes surprised. You're currently writing about strange sea creatures. Stop talking all that nonsense, Watson, Holmes replied immediately. I'm talking about my lexical summary on criminal toxicology. The work should be released in a few months. So, you're writing a book about poisoning, I corrected myself. But still Holmes did not agree and shook his head vigorously. The book is about the methods of analysis of toxicological processes in the human body, their diagnosis and verification for the purposes of scientific criminology, he explained. So about poison killings, I insisted and quickly changed the subject. In this case, we are dealing with the classical constellation of a closed space, a murder victim, 4 suspects. I recently reread Poe's stories about Auguste Dupin. Dupin, Holmes interrupted immediately. Spare me from this Belgian dilettante. French, I corrected. Holmes frowned. Excuse me? Well, rather a French one. I cleared my throat. A French dilettante. Holmes made a waving gesture. Never mind, Watson. This kind of literary adventure investigation, full of myth and speculative charlatanry, won't get us anywhere. Or do you want to present me a show monkey as a suspect in this case of the Japanese consul? Not really, I replied calmly. Maybe only if one was on the staff list of the legation. While Holmes's expression wavered a little indecisively between a punitive look and a suppressed amusement, our carriage came to a stop in front of the quite representative and somewhat narrow buildings of the Japanese consulate. Mr. Shimada already expected us in front of the heavily enforced entrance. The windows were barred in on all 3 floors. This made clear that in fact no perpetrator could have penetrated from outside, neither human nor primate. Mr. Shimada led us through the empty premises of the legation, while the staff had been instructed by him to stay in their respective private quarters for the time being, directly into the office of the deceased head of the delegation in the 3rd floor. The furniture was modern and functional, whereas many objects pointed at the country of origin and its history and culture. A Japanese flag with its vermilion sun disk on a white background, an East Asian tea service, a game board with black and white stones, wood paintings, the ornate gardens, the cherry blossoms, and geishas at the tea ceremony, and most impressively, an antique samurai knight's armor and 2 wall-mounted, slightly curved swords right next to the door. Apparently Holmes had no eye for these exhibits and went straight to the couch where the corpse of the lamentable Japanese ambassador was located. Was the body moved post-mortem? Asked Holmes. No, Mr. Shimada assured. The consul died right here and in this position. Holmes waved me over to examine the victim. He was far from making the usual peaceful expression of many dead. The corpse bore witness to the consul's death struggle. His hands cramped into claws, the white hair was dissected, and the lean body seemed distorted. His pale yellowish skin showed a bluish tendency. The eyelids were unnaturally wide open. When I examined the dead man's mouth, throat, and tongue, I noticed clearly visible swellings and a dark discoloration. In fact, everything indicated poisoning. The missing puncture holes, however, suggest no intravenous administration of the agent. The poison had been taken orally. Fugu, Mr. Shimada began to explain, starts to attack the organs and the nervous systems, ultimately leading to the paralysis of the respiratory tract. Lung failure and consequently suffocation are the immediate cause of death. A very gruesome death, I confirmed. In Japan, Mr. Shimada said, death through fugu is seen as especially meaningless and thus a death without honor. Of course, this only applies if it was your own fault. However, here in the consulate, Holmes noted, the pufferfish was not on the menu, I suppose. Shimada shook his head. Of course not. It's illegal under our own laws. Just like murder, murmured Holmes and began to circle the office. After the 3rd lap, he stopped and looked at Mr. Shimada. We will now hear your employees. Would you please make sure that they come here one after another? Very well, Mr. Shimada replied, and he was about to leave the office when he turned around at the door and asked, Who do you want to start with? Holmes did not hesitate 1 second. Well, of course, the chef. After only a short time, the chef was standing in front of us. He was a small, clearly overweight, bearded man, who was undoubtedly his own best customer. Only now did I realize that the interview would imply certain complications. The Japanese chef did not speak a word of English. That is why Mr. Shimada acted as a translator for us. Mr. Shimada, ask him about the last time he made fugu, said Holmes. Mr. Shimada directed a few words at the chef, who immediately stopped his previous smile and looked at us seriously. Kashite, he exclaimed determinedly. Even before Shimada could act, Holmes said, All right, and nodded reassuringly to the chef. Am I right in the assumption that he had never cooked fugu, never would, and could, in no case, reconcile it with his moral integrity? Something like that, Mr. Shimada replied. Gomen nasai, Holmes said, addressing the chef, and then turning back to Mr. Shimada. We do not want to offend nor in any way blame him. Could we perhaps know what the consul ate last night? While Mr. Shimada translated again, I briefly pulled Holmes aside. Holmes, how do you have knowledge of the Japanese language? Not now, Watson, he whispered, keeping an eye out for Mr. Shimada and the chef. We are in the middle of questioning. Gentlemen, Mr. Shimada interrupted, we would be ready. But first, you have to know that the consul lived an almost ascetic life. As usual, he refrained from having dinner yesterday evening and contented himself with a cup of kukicha tea. The chef personally prepared and served this tea here in this office. That was the last time he saw the consul. After that, he cleaned the kitchen and went to bed. Holmes's gaze immediately turned to the desk, and indeed there was still a porcelain teacup. This cup? He asked, pointing with his right index finger. Understanding the context even without English language skills, the chef nodded eagerly. Holmes went to the table, took the cup, and examined it extensively. At first glance, there was nothing unusual about this cup, besides maybe the artful Japanese craftsmanship. When Holmes led the cup to the direction of his mouth, and that was when I shouted, "For God's sakes, Holmes, do not drink!" and obstructed him from finishing his action. Holmes looked puzzled. As a result of my thrust, the cup fell from his fingers and fell to the ground, breaking into two parts. "My dear Watson," he said calmly, "with your overzealous behavior, you are destroying evidence. The cup was empty. I just wanted to smell it." While I apologized, with an embarrassed look on my face, Holmes picked up one of the shards and held it first under his and then right under my nose. "Well?" he asked expectantly. "No doubt you have a good nose," I said, without really knowing what Holmes was getting at. Holmes turned to Mr. Shimada. The somewhat harsh and dominant grassy aroma of the green tea may have deceived the consul, but Watson and I were aware of the quite subtle fishy smell. The fugu poison was in the cup. "Definitely," I confirmed again, surprised by Holmes's exceptional sensory acuity, for I had not noticed anything, not with all the will in the world. Mr. Shimada nodded. "The gallbladder of the fugu exudes an intense odor. Even the extracted venom retains that. Well done, gentlemen. We have the murder weapon." I scratched my head as I watched the shard in Holmes's hand as he was about to say goodbye to the chef. "Arigato," he said, bowing slightly. "Mr. Shimada, if you would bring us the next employee, please." The two consulate employees left the room, and we were alone for a few minutes. As soon as the door was closed, Holmes turned to me. "Well, Watson, what do you think?" I did not have to think twice. I think the cook would be the perfect culprit. He has knowledge, access, and possibility, but you'll be able to tell me why this is too simplistic of a thought. Holmes nodded. Yes, the conditions are indeed perfect, perhaps too perfect. One thing you have forgotten, however, is that the chef has no identifiable motive." I did not want to be deterred by this and answered quickly. "This could be any small thing, perhaps a simple insult. I've heard that Asians often overreact to personal demeanor." "My dear Watson," replied Holmes, "I do not intend to base our investigation on European prejudices. Additionally, a murder with fugu poisoning will have to be planned carefully. No, this chef, a simple man and a good believer, certainly did not travel thousands of miles to kill the envoy of his heavenly monarch. That makes no sense." "Maybe it was just the difference in rank that led to conflict and murder," I guessed, but got a disapproving answer from Holmes. "If it were up to you," he said, "the killer would always be the gardener, the butler, or the chef. However, most fatalities, unless they are robberies, take place within a given social class." The return of Mr. Shimada interrupted our little discussion, but I had lost the argument anyway. At his side was Mr. Katayama, the official delegate for economic affairs and trade relations. Mr. Katayama, surprisingly tall for a Japanese, middle-aged man, proved to be as polite as Mr. Shimada. Cautious with his gestures and facial expressions, trained in European manners, he was indeed an experienced diplomat who, of course, would have flawless knowledge of our language. Naturally, Holmes did notice these details. "Mr. Katayama," he began the interrogation, "am I right in the assumption that you have been in the diplomatic service of Your Majesty the Tenno for some time?" "Indeed," Mr. Katayama replied. "I have represented the economic and commercial interests of the empire in different missions for years. My most recent efforts took me to Prussia and southern Germany." "I understand," Holmes said. "And what interests are you exactly pursuing?" "Well, as you might know," Mr. Katayama explained, "Japan has been following a segregational course of politics against the West for over 200 years. Our ports were closed to any other European vessel but the ones from the Kingdom of the Netherlands. Now that we have finally overcome the shogunate, we are trying to catch up. Our economic, scientific, and technical deficit has been and remains significant. The industrialization of our nation is at an infant state. Within the imperial restoration, we are aiming to establish Japan as a modern industrial nation, which does not have to shy away from the comparison with Europe and the USA, not only, but also in foreign trade. For this, we need knowledge and education, machinery and infrastructure, resources and raw materials. Furthermore, a strict political system alongside a powerful military to make all that possible. During my time in the German Reich, I was able to gain extensive experience and secure connections, and here in the United Kingdom, Mr. Shimada added, we naturally hope for similar progress. Of course, Holmes repeated, who was not interested in international trade relations or politics. And what are your personal interests, Mr. Katayama? Mr. Katayama, now looking blankly at Holmes, replied, I cannot quite follow you, Mr. Holmes. Excuse me, Holmes apologized. Let me rephrase. Do you own a venture in Japan yourself? I do, Mr. Katayama confirmed. My trading company handles international import business, especially in metal goods and steel production sector. Of course, we strive for an independent steel industry. In this regard, the interests of the Japanese Empire and mine coincide. But how does that affect the murder of the consul? Holmes smiled. I just want to get an overall picture, he said. You are quite right. Let's put our focus back on this case. When have you seen the consul last? This morning, Mr. Katayama answered. Mr. Shimada and I tried to help him. We carried him to the couch where he died. Thank you. Your colleague already told me about that, said Holmes. However, I am more interested in when you have seen the consul in good health. Well, that was yesterday evening, the economic attaché explained. We had a short exchange of views on commercial contracts. An argument? Holmes asked. Not at all, Mr. Katayama asserted. Mr. Shimada intervened at this point. Excuse me, maybe I can contribute something here. On my way back to his quarters, our chef told me earlier that he heard the consul in his office speaking in an unusually loud voice as he cleaned the kitchen, and that you, Mr. Katayama, were present for a talk at that time. The addressee hesitated only briefly and then replied, My views do not have to coincide with those of the head of the delegation. My job as an expert also lies in correcting many misinterpretations based on lack of information. Holmes raised an eyebrow. And what was the correction yesterday evening about? Some terms of the contract, Mr. Katayama replied. Just insignificant details. In the end, I was able to convince the consul. Our conversation lasted no longer than 5 minutes. After that, I went straight to my bedroom. I see, Holmes said. Well, that would be all for now. Mr. Shimada, would you get the military attaché for questioning now? Mr. Shimada nodded and left the office alongside Mr. Katayama. When we were alone again, I felt compelled to recapitulate the state of things. So, Holmes, what do you think regarding the dispute Mr. Shimada wanted to leave us in the dark? That is indeed true, Holmes replied. But do not forget, there's been a murder here. Even innocent people are reluctant to divulge a potential motive in such a case. Ah, I understand, I countered. However, Mr. Katayama's consistently distracting and appeasing nature makes me somewhat suspicious. Holmes had to smile. It seems to me, my dear Watson, you have found a new prime suspect. Is the chef already relieved? In no way, I exclaimed. Good, said Holmes. It is important that we do not jump to conclusions, certainly not until we have heard all the suspects or witnesses. Right on cue, as if this was a play on stage, the door opened and Mr. Shimada entered again. He was accompanied by Mr. Hayashida, an old army general, who was responsible for military affairs and armaments issues within the Japanese delegation. Mr. Hayashida was actually wearing his uniform, had white hair, looked like he had seen quite a few battles, seemed patriotic and traditional. I also have to mention that his English pronunciation and vocabulary was nowhere near as perfect as Mr. Shimada's and Mr. Katayama's. For reasons of clarity, I would like to only hint at this in the following transcription of the questioning. Holmes offered Mr. Hayashida, the visitor, a chair on our side of the desk, but he declined. I'd rather stand, he said, taking a particular upright stance. As you wish, said Holmes. Shall we go straight to the point then? When did you last speak to the consul? The general loosened his stance, almost as if he gave himself a command to, before answering, "Today, when I came to the office because of all the commotion. At the time, the consul was already dead. Last night, we met here for a game." Holmes pointed at the board with the grid lines and the stones on the desk. "This game?" Mr. Hayashida nodded. "The game is called Go," he explained, "and the consul and I ended almost every day with one game." I inspected the board and stones and stated, "Probably akin to our checkers." The general turned to me. "I do not think," he said, "that you have a game comparable in complexity and philosophical depth in Europe." Before I could protest, Holmes took over the questioning again. "How did your game yesterday go? Did you win?" "Winning only plays a marginal role at Go," said Mr. Hayashida. "The focus is on discipline, concentration, and mental balance." "And how did this game go last night?" Holmes asked. "In fact, the consul had some trouble concentrating yesterday," the general replied. "At his request, we stopped the game after about 30 minutes and went to our respective rooms." Holmes nodded. "So you were the last person to see the consul yesterday," he said. "That's true," Mr. Hayashida confirmed. Apparently Holmes was about to end the questioning when I decided to address another topic again. "General," I began, "I myself have served in the army of Her Majesty the Queen in India and Afghanistan. I wonder where the alignments of the Japanese Empire in this time of great escalation between the European powers and their alliance politics lie. We will not interfere if Great Britain, France, and Germany decide to fight like hyenas over the distribution of colonial prey," said Mr. Hayashida. "I have little left for the barely honorable warfare with gunboats, machine guns, and grenades, and whatever the future brings, where a soldier's life has no more value and killing becomes an anonymous and massive deed. But I understand the need to modernize the Japanese army accordingly, and to build up an independent defense industry. Only then will we be able to secure our national and international interests. You should already know that they also extend to Korea, China, and Southeast Asia. The future alliance policy of our country will be shaped appropriately." My thoughts and concerns that Europeans and Americans were nourishing a viper in their bosoms by modernizing, industrializing, and rearming Japan were not off the table. But I did not let it get to me and answered, "I do really hope that the present friendly relations with the Empire result in a long-term partnership of mutual benefit." The general did not show his own certain doubts while he politely nodded at me. "Well then," said Holmes, who had seemed a bit absent-minded in the meantime, "we shall no longer bother, Mr. Hayashida. We thank you for your time." Once again, the general responded with just a nod, turned and headed for the exit. He stopped for a moment to look at the samurai armor. "Is that your armor?" Holmes asked. "No," Mr. Hayashida replied, without turning around. "Not anymore. This was my armor, but that was a long time ago. A very long time." Mr. Shimada opened the door, and the general left us. Holmes crossed his arms and looked down, slowly, in a circle. When I thought he would finally say something, he turned again in the opposite direction. Mr. Shimada, who was not familiar with these kinds of thinking pauses, anxiously waited for Holmes. I cleared my throat to bring Holmes back from his thinking escapades, with success. "Ah, Mr. Shimada," he shouted, as if he had just noticed him. "You are exactly the man I need now." "At your service," Mr. Shimada said, after a brief puzzlement. "How can I help you?" "Well, we interrogated 3 out of 4 potential perpetrators," Holmes explained. "Only you remain." "You suspect me?" Mr. Shimada asked calmly. "I would be a bad detective if I did not," Holmes replied. "You can't really deny that technically speaking you are the best candidate. Certainly it would have been possible for you to commit the murder without any difficulty and barely leaving any usable traces." Mr. Shimada agreed. "Of course. Who else would be better than a former police investigator, or detective, to plan and execute the perfect murder?" Holmes nodded, satisfied. "I see we are at an agreement. Imagine the following situation. You have just poisoned the consul, poured out a very small amount of the extract of the fugu's gallbladder unnoticed in his tea. In your possession, however, is still the remaining poison, which you probably stored in a small vial. Found, that vial could convict you. What do you do now?" Mr. Shimada answered quickly. "I would have to hide the bottle, but not in my own quarters because there would be a search sooner or later. Since I neither have access to the premises of the others nor to the kitchen, which is always blocked by the chef, I would have to get rid of the bottle right here in this office." Exactly, said Holmes, starting to look around the room, and after a few seconds turning back to Mr. Shimada. Good, Mr. Shimada. Would you be so kind as to summon all the embassy employees again? I'll clear up the case then. Mr. Shimada, clearly relieved, answered, Of course, Mr. Holmes, immediately, and set off. I was somewhat surprised. Holmes, you really solved the case? I asked. Not yet, was the slightly confusing answer. There are only hints and clues, possibilities and motives, but no evidence. The chef would have had the obvious opportunity. The economic attaché had a dispute with the consul, and the general would probably like it if the empire were to end its diplomatic relations with Europe as a result of an assassination. Most certainly, the two latter would have been able to pour the poison into the tea last night at a given moment when the consul was not observant. Everything is possible, and nothing is impossible to exclude. But Holmes, I said, still amazed, you have just promised to solve the case within the next minutes. How do you want to do that? Quite simply, Holmes replied. If there is no evidence, the perpetrator himself must provide. At the time, I could not say that I was aware of Holmes's plans. However, I was sure that, as usual, he knew exactly what he was doing. Therefore, I collected myself and offered my support. How can I help? Holmes smiled almost mischievously. My dear Watson, just play along. Soon after, all the members of the Japanese legation gathered in the consul's office, his corpse still laying on the couch, silently prosecuting, although we had covered it with a sheet. In front of us now were the four possible perpetrators: the security officer, Mr. Shimada, the economic attaché, Mr. Karayama, General Hayashida, and the chef, whose name we still did not know, and Mr. Shimada had to translate the following too. Gentlemen, began Holmes, as if he was opening a party, thank you for coming. I summoned you here because I will now, in your presence, clarify the murder of your consul. It also means that one of you will be exposed and convicted. Holmes took a meaningful pause while attentively watching the four Japanese men. Neither of them seemed nervous or restless. The offender, continued Holmes, did not make it easy for us. Detecting poisoning is a somewhat difficult task. Without a doubt, the pufferfish's poison has been in this, now unfortunately broken, teacup. Holmes pointed at the two shards that were now on the desk. It is also beyond question that the consul took the poison last night with his daily green tea, which is why he died this morning. The culprit slipped the poison into the tea in a favorable moment when the consul was distracted enough. But what happened to the poison vial? In order not to be associated with the murder, the perpetrator had to get rid of the vessel, and he hid it here in this room. Again, Holmes's eyes roamed the room. Then he took 5 steps towards the samurai armor beside the door and waved to me. Watson, would you please remove the helmet and turn it over? I did as ordered, and indeed, between the attachment of the neck strap and the inside of the helmet was a small and unlabeled bottle clamped. Holmes used a handkerchief to carefully take it out, and walked back to the desk and placed it next to the broken teacup. Then he turned back to the suspects while I tried to put the helmet back correctly. So, this is the poison vial from the perpetrator's possession, Holmes explained to the still attentive and perfectly quiet suspects. But who owns the vial? We have recently been given the opportunity to find out, with a completely new procedure called dactyloscopy, or, shortly after his inventor, the Galton test. Spiraling lines on the insides of your fingertips, so-called papillary ridges, are different and unique in every human being. Every object that you touch, you leave an equivalent, individually relatable imprint, even if it's not visible to the naked eye. The Galton test makes them visible. That is why we are going to get the fingerprints from the bottle, and as a counterpart, take the prints from all of you to compare them. Holmes turned to me and said, Dr. Watson, prepare everything for the Galton test. Of course, I had never heard of a Galton test, and I had my doubts as to whether or not there was one. Excuse me? Right now? I asked hesitatingly. Holmes looked at me insistently. What are you waiting for, Watson? Go, go. You have everything you need in your doctor's bag. When I opened my bag, which was also standing on the desk, the first thing I grabbed was a bunch of scalpels. My dear Watson, Holmes remarked, I don't think that it is quite necessary to remove the fingertips of our suspects in this case. Who knows, I mumbled, and finally found utensils that seemed adequate enough to fake such a Galton test. I took a bottle of distilled water, smaller vials with medicine against fever and headaches in it, a cotton ball, and a wound sealer, and spread everything on the table. After an encouraging nod from Holmes, I announced, "We're ready, all set for the Dalton test." "Galton," hissed Holmes. "Yes, of course, Galton test," I corrected myself immediately. Holmes smiled at the four suspects. "Who wants to start? Don't worry, it won't hurt." The consulate employees looked at each other hesitatingly, and obviously did not know what to think of this solution. However, when the chef raised his hand first to get tested, he was pushed hard to the side from behind. Mr. Katayama stepped out of the group and made his way to the door. "That's ridiculous," he shouted. "We will not undergo this unworthy test. General, step in." But Mr. Hayashida remained composed and looked at Holmes, and the back to Mr. Katayama. "I'm going to get tested," he said calmly, "because my hands are as pure as my conscience." He raised both arms and pointed at his palms to underline his point. Mr. Katayama took another step back, banging against the samurai armor. "Shimada, that's all your fault. Holmes has no jurisdiction here. Send him away." Shimada also remained calm. "If they need me to, Katayama, I will also undergo the Galton test," he said. "Dr. Watson was so kind as to introduce me to the procedure." I nodded quickly to confirm his claim. "Surrender, Katayama," General Hayashida ordered. "We will make sure that you will be transferred to Japan and given the opportunity to explain yourself at the court of the Emperor." "Never!" Mr. Katayama shouted, and in one quick turn, grabbed one of the samurai swords from the wall behind him and quickly pulled it out of its scabbard. Holmes was about to approach the convicted perpetrator, but I held him back at his shoulder, while the chef unexpectedly blocked the door. "Get away from the door," Mr. Katayama shouted at him immediately. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will not hesitate if necessary." He threatened the chef with the tip of his blade by pointing it at his face only a few inches away, but the chef remained calm and kept a firm face. "Out of the way, or you're a dead man," Mr. Katayama repeated frantically. Within a fraction of a second, the cook slammed the sword out of Katayama's hand with a blow to his arm, following a karate chop against his larynx. He then threw him over his shoulder to the ground, where he immediately held him down in a stranglehold. Mr. Katayama, now immobilized, lied grasping for air on the floor. "You are hereby under arrest," Mr. Shimada said as he and the chef pulled the murderer up from the floor to take him away and temporarily lock him up in his room. This would be the last time we saw Mr. Katayama. On our way home, we did not talk much, since we had to process the events at first. After a while, though, I could not hold myself back anymore. "Holmes," I said, "what was up with this Galton test? That could have gone so wrong. I've never heard of that." Holmes winked at me. "That is because the Galton test does not even exist. Well, to be precise, it does not exist yet. For now, those are the dreams of the future. As a fact, Francis Galton, a colleague of yours, is currently working on developing a similar process for fingerprint identification, but it will take years, maybe even decades, before it becomes a reliable method for criminalistics, which will withstand court." "I guess that would mean," I countered, "that investigative work will be greatly facilitated in the future, at least as long as the offender does not wear gloves." "Don't worry, my dear Watson," Holmes replied. "A detective's more reliable tool will always be his mind." The next morning at the breakfast table on Baker Street, I wanted to get to the bottom of the last two secrets surrounding our case from yesterday. "Holmes, you still owe me explanations," I blurted out while Holmes was drinking tea, not suspecting such an outbreak. "I do?" he asked. "What about yesterday's case still got you questioning?" "For one," I began, "I'd like to know how you knew where the poison vial was. Your little orchestration would not have done us any good if you did not find it." "Actually, that was pretty easy," Holmes claimed. "The chin strap of the samurai helmet was shifted and aligned asymmetrically. Nobody would leave an exhibit like this. Someone had to hurry and hide it. I noticed that when we first entered the consul's office." "Holmes, you are an equally remarkable as strange person," I said with due amazement, "and that leads me to my second question." "Go ahead," Holmes said with a welcoming gesture. I put on a straight face. "Your Japanese knowledge, Holmes, where did that come from?" "Ah, that's an old story," Holmes said. When I visited the World's Fair in Vienna 10 years ago, at that time the Japanese Empire took part in it for the first time with a large delegation. There, I learned about the art of origami from a nodding acquaintance. I guess a few Japanese words got stuck here and there. I was not entirely sure whether I should believe this story. Origami, an acquaintance, I repeated, skeptical. Yes, my dear Watson, Holmes confirmed carelessly. A young lady, I think I can still recall her name. Naruko, yes, Naruko Yanagihara. For heaven's sakes, Holmes, I shouted and smacked myself against the forehead. In honor of your memory. But don't you know who this Naruko is? She's the mother of the Japanese heir. Holmes was visibly surprised. Oh, really? Even before I could explain the complexities of the relation of the Japanese court, Miss Hudson knocked on our door. She gave us a small parcel with a cover letter from a messenger. Holmes opened the letter. It was from Mr. Shimada. Katayama confessed, Holmes reported after reading. Mr. Shimada writes that he had admitted to accepting bribes from the Prussian steel industry to favor their trade arguments. The consul found out about their machinations and threatened to denounce him, and that is why he was murdered. What a mundane, banal motive. Money, I said. Yes, our fee has been deposited at my bank, added Holmes. In addition, Mr. Shimada apologizes for not appearing in person anymore. He is going on a boat to Yokohama along with Mr. Katayama this morning to personally hand him over to Japanese authorities. And what's in the package? I asked as I already started to open it. Probably Japanese specialties, with the best regards from the chef, said Holmes. In fact, the package contained a plate of small bites reminiscent to hors d'oeuvres. Apparently, rice was used as a base and the filling was fish. Just try it, Watson, Holmes invited. It says in the letter that it is not fugu, but tuna. Good, what a relief, I said dryly, taking one of the snacks neatly and putting it in my mouth as a whole. Despite the unconventional consistency, an interesting flavor unfolded, dominated by the fish. A little sour, probably due to the rice preparation. Not bad, I testified. What is the name of this dish? Holmes took another look at the letter to see. It's called sushi. A name as simple as the idea, I said, taking the next piece. Well, I'm convinced. Holmes, on the other hand, shook his head. I do not know, Watson, he said slowly. Raw fish on sticky rice balls. That will never prevail in Europe. Then he began folding a dove from the letter, as he more and more got lost in his thoughts.